Historically, it so happened that in its early days, the USSR's automotive industry largely took its origins from overseas. After an agreement was signed with the American company Ford Motor Company in 1929, mass production of passenger and cargo vehicles was established in the young state, thanks to the technical assistance of foreign partners. In addition, the country's top officials had a soft spot for American cars. For instance, as early as the 1920s, Stalin was fond of powerful 12-cylinder Packards. That's why when work began on the future GAZ-110, the Packard 180 was taken as a basis. As for the Packard 12 gifted by Roosevelt, the leader used it until the end of his days. I use AI voiceover because my English isn't perfect yet. But everything else, ideas, research, script, and editing, I do myself. If you enjoy this kind of content, please like the video and subscribe. It's a small click for you, but a big help for the channel. By the mid-1950s, this large and quite respectable sedan had clearly become outdated. After all, American trends changed at lightning speed. In the battle for a jaded customer, designers, artists, and engineers from various manufacturers staged a true arms race, releasing new models every single year. By the early 1950s, mid-size American sedans had noticeably grown in size, becoming not only longer but also wider. In addition, large displacement engines became even more powerful and voluminous, while the styling increasingly embraced aviation and even space-age themes. Large panoramic windows with sharp curves, an abundance of chrome, long tail fins on the rear fenders, and peculiar target sights on the bumpers. All of these were hallmark features of the 1950s, which reached their peak by the end of the decade. However, let's return to the USSR. At that time in the USSR, top government officials continued to use Packards and ZS cars. For lower-ranking officials, the GAZ-12 ZIM was developed and produced in the late 1940s. Now is the right time to clarify the situation a bit regarding the party hierarchy in the USSR and which car was assigned to which official. At the top of the hierarchy were large limousines like the GAZ-110. These were reserved for the highest ranks of the Soviet government and Communist Party, Politburo members, general secretaries, and ministers. Next came the GAZ-12 ZIM, which was used by mid to high-level officials such as senior bureaucrats, directors of major factories, generals, and diplomats. At the bottom of this hierarchy was the GAZ-21 Volga, assigned to middle management and respected professionals like doctors, engineers, writers, lawyers, and mid-level party members. This structure remained largely unchanged all the way into the 1990s, until the Soviet Union collapsed. Car models were updated over time, but the system of distribution stayed the same. Interestingly, even among the officials who were assigned a GAZ-21 Volga, there was an internal hierarchy. Higher-ranking officials would receive a black Volga, while others got whichever color was available, from white to brown. Still, in Soviet society, the Volga was widely seen as a symbol of status and steady employment. The black Volga, in particular, became legendary, a sign of real success and high position. Technically, any Soviet citizen could buy a Volga if they could afford it. The only restriction was that station wagon versions were not sold to private individuals. Authorities believed that owning a wagon-style car could encourage people to pursue unofficial income sources. These versions were mostly used in hospitals and medical institutions. The GAZ-12 ZIM was also, in theory, available for purchase, but it was almost always painted black and remained far beyond the reach of most buyers. However, many people got to ride in one, since the ZIM was often used as a taxi in major Soviet cities. There was also a medical version of the ZIM. The ZS-110, of course, was never sold to the public. It was painted exclusively in black, or a light parade gray. Surprisingly, though, even this high-ranking government limousine was used as a taxi, albeit in small numbers, and only in Moscow and Leningrad. So, in theory, anyone could briefly feel like a Soviet leader, though that's more of a joke. There was also a medical version of the GAZ-13, used only in the major cities. Our main character today belonged to the mid-tier class of Soviet executive cars.
На Горьковском заводе имени Молотова начался серийный выпуск нового легкового автомобиля «ЗИМ». В цехах налажено поточное производство этих машин.
By the late 1950s, the ZIM was clearly outdated. It resembled American sedans from 5 or even 7 years prior, and by their standards, that was already ancient history. Compared to the latest American dreadnoughts, the Soviet sedan looked less like a stylish executive car and more like a modest retiree. Technically, it had fallen behind as well. Its 3.5-liter engine produced just 90 horsepower, which might have been acceptable in the 1940s, but its top speed was only 120 kilometers per hour, 75 miles per hour, and 0 to 100 kilometers per hour, 62 miles per hour, took a painfully slow 37 seconds. Sure, high-ranking officials weren't meant to be racing anywhere, but both engineers and drivers agreed the car lacked the performance needed to quickly rush someone to a key government meeting if necessary. The development of a new Soviet limousine began after a key event, the acquisition of 2 American Packards, a Caribbean and a Patrician. Both were thoroughly studied by the experts at NAMI, as well as designers at GAZ and ZIL. The new Gorky-built car wasn't just meant to be modern. It also needed to fix the shortcomings of the GAZ-12. The ZIM was heavy to steer, noisy for its class, and over time issues with the chassis and body durability had become apparent. GAZ engineers Prosvirin and Yumashev delivered. The Chaika looked nothing like the ZIM, and it was a completely different car under the skin as well. Instead of the flawed unibody design, it used a separate X-shaped frame with rubber bushings, and the stylish bodywork was created by designer Lebedev. In the summer of 1957, the first prototype of the GAZ-13 was built. It featured a 2-tone paint job, light cream on top and deep maroon below. In some design details, the prototype closely mimicked Packard styling, most notably the iconic hood ornament, shaped like a bird, which directly inspired the car's name, Chaika, meaning gull in Russian. Interestingly, the similar hood ornament on Packard models simply signified a V-shaped engine layout. Among the innovations were a push-button automatic transmission, hydraulic power steering, vacuum-assisted brakes, and tubeless tires, a package of modern features that ensured smooth handling and a high level of comfort, fitting for a state limousine. Naturally, the new car needed a new heart. Rather than reinventing the wheel, the engineers modeled their V8 engine on a Chrysler design. But for simplicity and parts sharing, they borrowed the piston group and a valve train from the GAZ-21 Volga and simply doubled the cylinder count. The resulting 4.89-liter V8 produced 180 horsepower, but testing showed that more power was needed. By increasing displacement to 5.5 liters, they achieved 195 horsepower. The engine featured wet cylinder liners and a centrifugal oil filter, advanced solutions for the time. Later prototypes built in 1958 received some refinements and, in almost the same form, the Chaika went into full production in early 1959. By then, the playful color schemes of the early prototypes had given way to a formal black finish, fitting for a car destined to serve government ministries and party committees. As Henry Ford once famously said, "You can have it in any color as long as it's black." Naturally, the production of the GAZ-13 initially began as small scale and was timed to coincide with a major event, the 21st Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. This Congress was famous for declaring the final victory of socialism in the USSR and setting a course toward communism by the 1980s. As for the Chaika, it had already gained international recognition a year earlier in its pre-production form, winning the Grand Prix at the World's Fair Expo 58 in Brussels. Soon after mass production began, the Chaikas weren't just used to serve the Soviet political elite. They also appeared at Soviet diplomatic missions abroad. In fact, by the 1960s, nearly half the diplomatic corps in Moscow was riding around in GAZ-13s, ambassadors and consuls from Finland, Hungary, East Germany, Bulgaria, Mongolia, North Korea, Ethiopia, Indonesia, and many more countries used them as official vehicles. One Chaika even ended up in the fleet of the American embassy. Unlike its predecessor, the Chaika was never used as a taxi, although it did serve in some interesting roles. But more on that later. Just a few years after launch, in 1962, the car received minor updates: a new K114 carburetor, revised hubcaps, and new interior trim. In the following decade, the GAZ-13 was fitted with a dual-circuit brake system, seatbelts, and a transistor radio with shortwave reception. The minimal changes were easy to explain. Both technically and stylistically, the Chaika was so well designed from the start that it needed almost no refinement. For the standards of the 1960s, the interior looked modern, stylish, even luxurious, rivaling American counterparts in the smallest of details. And the car's main user, the mid-ranking Soviet official, tended to be conservative, and the Chaika suited them perfectly. Despite the obvious resemblance to its American inspirations, the Chaika ended up with its own distinct identity. It didn't feel like a direct copy of the Packards, not least because one of them, the Patrician, was a four-window sedan rather than a long wheelbase limousine, and the Caribbean was a two-door hardtop with no central pillar at all. Thanks to its generous proportions, the Chaika's massive body looked imposing, yet surprisingly dynamic. This impression was enhanced by the generous use of chrome trim and the rearward slanting angles of many body elements. The six-window layout gave the body a somewhat formal character, but it never appeared clumsy or overly heavy. Although all production Chaikas were painted in official black, there was one notable exception. Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman in space, was presented with a white Chaika by the Soviet government. In 1961, there was an attempt to release a more modern version of the car with a redesigned front end in the style of contemporary American vehicles. However, the Chaika continued to be produced without changes until 1981, as the updated design was never approved.
Изменена облицовка. Введен новый передний бампер с резиновыми клыками.
There were three body types for the Chaika: the limousine itself, the phaeton, as it was officially called, used for military parades, ceremonies, and official receptions. But the third body type deserves special attention. A station wagon version of the Chaika also existed, though it had nothing to do with carrying cargo. Rather, by the will of history, these Chaika wagons regularly transported very valuable, special cargo, high-ranking officials. In the early 1970s, a new medical institution was established under the 4th Main Directorate of the USSR Ministry of Health, the Unified Special Hospital with Polyclinic, unofficially known as the Kremlin Hospital. It served nearly all senior government officials, many of whom were of advanced age. To ensure proper emergency care, a special type of vehicle was needed to transport them to the hospital if required. To quickly create such a car, designers used the GAZ-13 platform, heavily modifying the body into a full-size station wagon. The roof height didn't matter. Patients were transported lying down, and no emergency procedures were expected during transit. The Riga bus factory, which had experience producing medical vehicles, was tasked with this limited production. The sedans arrived from Gorky, were partially disassembled, had their roofs and trunks removed, and received new three-piece roofs and fifth rear lift gates. Additional side windows were added, making the car an 8-window vehicle. Inside, there were stretchers, seats for accompanying medical staff, and a spare tire compartment hidden behind a fake rear door that didn't open into the cabin. Technically, the car remained very close to the standard Chaika, even retaining the signature black paint. These cars became known as the Black Doctor among the people. Only 20 were built, and today they are considered some of the rarest and most desirable collector cars in post-Soviet history. As previously mentioned, unlike its predecessor, the Chaika was never used as a taxi. However, ordinary citizens still had a chance to ride in one. After the end of its party career, the GAZ-13 became available to the public. Retired limousines were reassigned to civil registry offices, similar to marriage bureaus, and served as wedding cars, enjoying consistent popularity among newlyweds. From 1977 onward, the original GAZ-13 Chaika was produced in parallel with its successor, the GAZ-14, a new generation of Soviet executive limousines. As the GAZ-14 entered service, the older model was gradually moved down the unofficial hierarchy, though it continued to transport high-ranking officials. Private ownership of these cars was extremely rare, with a few notable exceptions like writer Mikhail Sholokhov or cosmonaut Valentina Tereshkova. Production remained limited, about 150 units per year. Over 2 decades, just over 3,000 GAZ-13s were built, and only a few have survived to this day. In the early 1980s, the outdated Chaika was finally replaced by the more modern GAZ-14, while lower-tier officials were moved to the new GAZ-3102 personal sedan. After decommissioning, many Chaikas were sold off and ended up in private hands. Some kept their official black color, while others were repainted to suit the tastes of their new owners. Thus ended the story of one of the most iconic cars of the Soviet era. Not just a vehicle, but a true symbol of status, power, and its time. The GAZ-13 Chaika remains in the memory of generations as an integral part of the Soviet elite's image, and today stands as a rare and valuable relic of a bygone era, with a unique design and a fascinating history.